Okay, so what I wanted to do with all of you folks is just talk a couple of product interview basics, but then really most importantly, leave ample time for you all to ask questions. I figured we could use the chat if that's okay with you all. So as we get into the Q&A part, feel free to pop questions into the chat, and I will try to answer them as they come in. So just a little bit about me. I am, like I said, my name is Tim. I'm a VP of product here at Etsy. We're a global marketplace for handmade and vintage items where independent creative sellers can, really reach a global audience. I have been at Etsy for a total of nearly or just over 10 years. So you can imagine 10 years ago, we were quite small. I think we were maybe 5 PMs, and now we're around about 100. So there's been a lot of hiring that's gone on in that time. I also did a quick stint leading product and design at SoulCycle, where we grew the team from 5 to 19 within 12 months. So again, as you can imagine, I've interviewed a fair number of product people along the way. So I just wanted to share a couple of tips. These will be quite general because the hiring process and what each company is looking for is quite different. But I think these are some things that kind of scale across different companies, different sizes of companies, different types of product roles. So the standard disclaimer, your mileage may vary. Like I said, each company will have maybe very specific things that they're looking for during their interview process, and others might be looking for more general skill sets. So, just take these with a little pinch of salt. So to jump right into some of the things that I think about a lot when I'm hiring product people is kind of aligned around some of the skills that we really look for, certainly at Etsy in our PMs. And so kind of touching on 3 areas, and then also really thinking about you, the interviewee: curiosity, impact, and communication. So these are kind of, almost like pro tips. They're not rocket science, but I often find that people forget these maybe more than you might expect. So one thing that I just love to see from product people, and I think a great product person is inherently a very curious person. They want to learn more about the world and the product that they're building and the customers they're building for, is be ready to ask questions. Do some research into the company, do some research into the people who you'll be speaking with. But one thing I've seen be a little bit of a kind of failure mode is don't try to ask the super smart questions. I read your S1 filing and you said that your stock offering will do this, that, and the other. So really try to know your audience. Ultimately, as product people, we're often building for other people, and so just think about what do you want to learn without trying to, and a genuine curiosity, without trying to kind of be too smart or too intelligent seeming in an interview process. When we're talking about impact, be ready to talk about the work you've done. If you're getting into product, it may not be exactly product work that you're able to talk about, but I guarantee you've had impact in the work you've done, either at college, in your, the jobs you've had so far, even if they're not product management jobs. And be ready to be really specific, right? Speaking in general terms is often really hard to tease out what you've actually done. And so while being specific might seem like you're narrowing in on one project, I found that going deep is really valuable because it gives the interviewer a real sense of the work you've done and the impact you've had. And the other thing I find PMs often talk about is the team. We all work in teams, and frankly, we wouldn't be able to do work without the teams we work with, but be really clear about what the impact that you had. We as a team, we hit X KPI. Okay, but what role did you play in doing that? Did you create the roadmap? Did you prioritize the backlog? And that, again, is really useful for an interviewer to really understand what you are able to bring to a team setting. Talking about communication, which is something that is part and parcel of the product management role, is one thing that I see a lot of people being nervous to do is just ask for clarification. If the question you're being asked isn't clear, is framed in a way that doesn't make sense, just say, hey, I don't understand what you're asking me. Could you clarify? Could you reframe that? Because that shows that you're listening and you really want to be able to answer the question directly, but you maybe just need a little bit more information, or you just need a little bit more clarification to be able to do that. And then the other thing is, interviews are often quite short. They're very stressful situations, but make sure you take a beat to collect your thoughts. If the question is maybe a little bit more complex, has multiple layers, or frankly, even if it doesn't, take that moment to really think about, what do I want to say here? And I found that really successful candidates do that very well. They say, okay, let me just take a moment, collect my thoughts, and then, deliver an answer that is really, really thought through and structured. And as an interviewer, that's really useful because it helps you really see that they're able to structure their thinking and not just kind of ramble. The final thing I will talk about is you, the interviewee. So really importantly, important to remember that you're also interviewing the interviewers. Often they're people who you might work directly with, and the company. And so, obviously the interviewer is there to ask you questions, and make sure that, you think there'll be a skill set match and that you would be really a great employee. But it's also your role and your kind of job to make sure that you think this is a place for you. Is this exciting work? Do I think I could work well with these people? Does the culture seem like something that I would enjoy working in? And so really remember that, part of asking questions is for you to be able to understand, is this a right place for you to spend some time? And then, the reality is many interviews don't work out. You won't get the role. But what I found is the world of product management is pretty small, especially the world of product management in specific areas. If you're looking in, New York or in Austin. So if the role doesn't work out, the chances that you might come across similar people in the next interview or when they move on to the next company is pretty high. And so, I would just encourage you not to get discouraged, and keep in touch with people that you have interviewed with, because those often prove to be really great relationships that you can build on as you think about the next role you might be applying for or the next company that you're really interested in. So it was a little whistle-stop tour. Like I said, I wanted to make sure that there was lots of time to ask questions. The thing that I will, of course, end with is that we're hiring at Etsy. We are hiring across the board at many different levels, and of course in product management. Etsy.com/careers is where you can go to find the roles that we have open at the moment, and there will be more as we get into 2022. We also have some representatives from our wonderful recruiting team here in our hiring booth. Depending what time it is, we've got NJ, we've got Rick, or we've got Leo. They'd love to hear from you. They'd love to share more about what we're up to, what the vision of Etsy and the things that we're working on as a product organization. So with that, I will start to look through some questions. Thank you for linking to the booth there, Katya. I appreciate that. So if you have any questions about topics that I just talked about or other things that you're really curious about when it comes to interviewing for product management roles, I would love to take your questions. Okay, a couple coming in. So Priyanka is asking, and I'll repeat the questions just so that you all don't have to keep track of them in the chat. Are these roles remote or hybrid? I'm based out of SF, so I'd love to know about remote opportunities or opportunities in SF. Yeah, awesome. So we have offices in a few different places, and San Francisco is one of them. So there's definitely opportunities there in the San Francisco office. And, like many companies, given the reality of COVID and kind of the changing workplace dynamic, a lot of our roles are remote friendly. I believe that that's noted in the job description. But generally speaking, we're really looking across the US to make sure that we can attract the top and most diverse talent. Okay. Siri's asking, what are the top 3 qualities required in a PM to be successful? So I I won't speak for all companies. I'll speak for myself and for Etsy. A couple of the things that we really look for. Number one is maybe, as I was mentioning earlier, the ability to have impact. Ultimately, our jobs as product managers is to make sure that we are working on the top priority things that we think will improve the customer experience and ultimately drive the business. And so really that's job one. And so really looking for the ability to prioritize, to make sure that the best ideas are bubbling to the top and that the team is working on those is really critical. The other thing that we think a lot about and really make sure that people are exceptional at Etsy is collaboration. We work in a very, very highly collaborative environment, and that's typical of many tech companies. You'll be working with product designers and engineers and product marketers and many people across the organization. And we really value those cross-functional partnerships because ultimately, I believe very strongly that it leads to better products being built. And so the ability to collaborate with a diverse set of people is really important. And then the final thing that I personally look for a lot, which was the first thing I led with, is curiosity. I found that the best PMs are ones who are just really, really eager to learn about new problem spaces, to learn about new customers, new businesses, because ultimately our jobs change quite a lot, quite often. The world of technology evolves very quickly. The types of things that are most important to a business evolve from quarter to quarter, from year to year. And so a curious mindset, really a growth mindset, is really, really valuable because it helps you embrace whatever the next project or the next company, depending on how you're thinking about it, might be. Okay, Frank asked similar questions, so I think we just covered some of those. Adam is asking, what's the single biggest interviewing mistake you see? Oof. And obviously there's egregious ones, which I won't go into. I think one of the failure modes that I see a lot is maybe getting to my point earlier about asking clarifying questions and really making sure that you're answering the questions that the interviewer is asking in very direct and specific ways. And so oftentimes there's candidates who will think they understand a question and go off on a complete tangent, and then the interviewer has to ask a lot of clarifying questions or really kind of course correct and bring them back to the original question. One thing that we do a lot at Etsy is we have interview rubrics, meaning each interviewer is really tasked with digging into a specific skill set or a specific competency. And so that one of the reasons we do that is it removes bias from our interview process. And so the interviewer will invariably be looking to get something very specific out of the interview. And so as an interviewee, making sure that to the extent possible, you're asking questions like, is there anything else I can build on to help you understand about my ability to have impact, or is this really getting at what you're asking? I found that is very helpful. Priyanka's asking, what does the interview process at Etsy look like? So it's changed over the last 18 months, as you can imagine, because we're all remote. So for the most part, a typical interview process, which is not isolated to Etsy, is there will be a phone screen with one of our recruiters or someone on the recruiting team. There will be a phone screen with the hiring manager, so ultimately the person who the new hire would report into. And then we typically do a cross-functional interview loop that is anywhere from 4 to 6 interviewers. And as I mentioned earlier, just before, each of those folks is looking to understand a different skill set. And those interviews are anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. At the moment, those are all over video. Maybe they will be back in person at some point. And that, generally speaking, is it. And the reason for that is we found that we get enough signal out of those things in order to make really good decisions. In some cases, there might be a follow-up where we need a little bit more signal on a specific skill set. But generally speaking, phone screen with a recruiter, phone screen with the hiring manager, and then an on-site or on video hiring loop with product management, product design, engineering, and marketing or other roles as it may be relevant. Jackie's asking, do you typically have a case study? Yes. I personally really value product case studies, and in many of our product interviews, we use them. Reason being, it really gives you the opportunity to show how you think on the fly and problem solve. And it gives the interviewer kind of an opportunity to understand something very similar where I'm sure you've all spent a lot of time crafting your resumes and really thinking about how you can frame the work that you've already done. And that's very valuable, but it's also, in product management, absolutely critical that you can think about a new problem space and break a problem down, really isolate the most critical things to think about and focus on. And so in kind of a real world setting, in an in-person setting, we use whiteboards to really map out problem spaces and understand focus areas. We've tried a few different things in the remote world using Google Docs and things so that we can start to capture live on the fly thinking as best possible. Okay, we've got another Tim here. My question is for new candidates that have just completed courses to be certified PM. What should I be applying for? And more importantly, what position am I a fit for? It's a little challenging, Tim, to answer that without knowing your background and kind of your interests. But at a basic level, I would suggest really applying for at companies where you have a strong interest in the industry or it's an industry you've worked in the past, maybe in your product management life. Reason being there, you have a little bit of a leg up. You understand the space in a bit more detail. You can show a lot of passion for it. And then it really depends on company size. Like a bigger company, such as the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, have really robust associate product manager programs, and they're fantastic ways to kind of learn on the job. Slightly smaller companies probably don't have the resources to invest in something like an APM program, and so there you might be looking at more, kind of standard product manager jobs. And so it really depends on the size of the company, the industry, and what your personal interests are. Yassi is asking a question about how many rounds of interviews. We just touched on something like that. So hopefully, Yassi, I cover what you're asking in what I just talked about with our hiring manager, recruiter hiring manager on-site flow. Matthew's asking, not all roles in product management positions work out in such a positive way. Are there many factors? There are many factors that go into this. How do you suggest speaking to or spinning off those lessons learned? Yeah, fair. Okay. I personally, and I think many product leaders, really appreciate candor when it comes to failure. I think it's part and parcel of working in product management. Not everything you do will work. Not every feature you launch will be successful. Not every team you work on will be a wild success. So I would say own it. Be really honest, and really try to dig into the reasons why something didn't work out. Many things will fail, as I just said, but showing introspection and the ability to think about why specifically do you think it failed, I found to be a really, really valuable trait in PMs. So don't dust it under the table, but also just don't only focus on failures. I'm sure there are things that, many people, all of you have worked on that are successful. So make sure you balance it out. Don't only think about the failures, but also, like I said, don't shy away from talking about them, because ultimately that is a huge chunk of what we have to handle as PMs. Winnie is asking about Canada. Moja is asking something similar. That would be a great question for our recruiting team. So I would, and not to dodge the question, I'm actually not sure what the answer to that is. So if you are able to jump into the hiring booth and ask them, I'm sure they would be able to answer your question in a lot more specific terms. Yassi is asking, what is the PM daily life? Wild and varied. And how is the product culture? What is the product culture like at Etsy? So the world of product management, it varies company to company, it varies team to team, it varies day to day. So I think one of the constants is, especially at Etsy, is you will spend a huge chunk of your time with your cross-functional squad, with your engineering manager, with your product design counterpart, with the engineers on your team. And so a lot of that is spent in really unpacking, the problem space, unpacking customer needs, really inspecting A/B tests. Did this thing work? Why did it work? And so that's really kind of the center of gravity, is the cross-functional squad. So a lot of day-to-day life is spent there. And we also then, as a product organization, have forums where we roll up work. For example, in my group, we do bi-weekly product crits, where each PM is bringing a problem that they're working on, or a feature that they're about to launch, to get feedback from other product managers. It's often really, really valuable to hear from your peers, because there's often blind spots that you're hoping to uncover and really talk through. So that's a little bit of a taste. I'm sure I'm not doing the overall culture at Etsy complete justice, but like I mentioned before, it is very highly collaborative, and our PMs are empowered to really go out, identify problems, and make sure that those are problems that are valuable for our customers, our buyers, and our sellers typically, as well as the business itself. Okay, a question about internships. That is also a good question, also one for the recruiting team. In the past, we have not done product management internships. I am not sure whether we will in 2022. We have a really robust engineering internship program, on the other hand. But that would be a great question for our recruiting team as well. If you could, I assume that says, if you could ask a PM candidate one question, what would it be? Yeah, thanks for clarifying, Kim. That's really tough. I honestly don't think there is a single question that I would be able to ask that would give really, really valuable insight into the overall person. So yeah, it's a bit of a cheap answer, but I think a single question would be really missing the point. I think that, you need to ask about a few different skills to really understand how someone acts and is a product manager. You mentioned you've interviewed and hired many PMs. Can you share the most impactful story shared by a past candidate? That's a good one. I'm blanking a little bit on specifics. One of the questions I love to ask is, what's something that you've taught yourself over the last 6 months, say? 6 months, because it's more time bound. And really, ultimately, the question behind the question is, are you motivated and able to learn new skills on your own? And that usually uncovers a ton of really, really interesting skills that people are working on. Those are sometimes languages. As you can imagine, at Etsy, people are often really interested in crafts. So you have people, learning how to learning pottery, or learning different ways to use leather in crafts and things like that. And the reason I love those types of answers is you often see people really light up. You get so much passion, and it's, of course, not directly related to the product management job, but I found that, people's passion is a really valuable thing. And if you can understand what they're passionate about, it often makes it a lot easier to A, understand them as a person, and B, passion generally translates. So if you're excited about learning how to make pots, chances are you can get really excited about different problems as well. When a classic PM question gets asked in an interview, like how many ping pong balls can you fit on a plane? What are you hoping to learn from those exercises? I mean, that's a question from Eric. Eric, honestly, those are, I find to be, that's like a typical kind of management consultancy question. Ultimately, and so we don't, I personally and we at Etsy don't use them that often in the product management context. Ultimately, they're really looking for, how do you break down a problem space? It's a pretty large, unbounded concept of how many ping pong balls could you fit in a given space, and really looking for, okay, well, I know how big a ping pong ball is. Like, how might I think about estimating the number? What are some of the inputs that I would be looking for? What questions do I ask to clarify what's really being asked? So those are often really about thinking on the fly and breaking down a problem. Though personally, I find a product exercise is a much more kind of product management specific way to get at similar concepts of thinking on the fly, being faced with a new problem space. How does a person react? Okay, McKenna's asking, do you have any tips for product managers at consulting firms who are trying to transition into a product role in industry? What do you look for from candidates who are transitioning from consulting? That's a great question. Where to start? One of the things I think is really valuable about consulting is, in many cases, the wide range of problem spaces that you will have seen. So to the extent that you think that's true and that's a strength, being able to talk about the different types of problems you have faced and solved, I think is really valuable. And to the extent possible, showing that I was working on a specific project that I think is really relevant for this company and why. Because chances are there's some commonality between the work you might have done in consulting and the work you might be doing in-house at a company. I think one of the things I look for specifically for folks from consulting is how close to execution have they been? There's a lot of the world of consulting that ends up being, here's a slide deck with recommendations and kind of walk away. And ultimately, that's not something that we can really afford to do in product management, right? It's about having the idea and then executing on the idea. So to the extent possible, where you've been, maybe more embedded with a client and really seen something through from an idea to launching a feature or seeing a project through to completion, I found that to be really valuable because it really highlights the ability not only to think about kind of big ideas and break down a problem space, but then also execute against that. Okay, are there any Etsy PM positions outside the US in a Europe-friendly time zone? The answer is yes. We have an office in Dublin in Ireland. I don't think we have any open roles out of Dublin at the moment, but that's certainly a place where we are looking to grow the team over time. So I would definitely say, check back in on our careers page, and openings might open up out of Europe. Priyanka, it's focusing on the solution rather than the problem. This is in reference to Adam's question. Let me just scroll back up and remind myself what Adam's question was. You know what? I'm going to skip that one in the interest of time, just because it's a little challenging to scroll around here. Apologies, Priyanka. Gargi asked, you recruit from the UK, remote or on-site. Like I said, the majority of our Europe product hiring is out of Dublin, so that's where we hire. Okay, I am skipping around a little bit, so apologies if I skip over your question, just because we have 1 minute left. There's a few about remote and on-site. So as I mentioned, we hire across the U.S. We also opened an office in Mexico, Mexico City to be more specific. So we're hiring out of there as well. Okay, one more question here about the case study. Can you give an example of a case study you could expect to solve at Etsy? Is it focused on a current problem Etsy is trying to solve? That's a good question. So there are actually some ethical questions that we think about when constructing a case study. One thing we try to make sure is that it is not actually something that we are directly working on, because there can be some challenges there related to if we end up using that idea or a similar idea that came up in an interview context, there can be some challenges there. So that said, what I often try to do, and we try to do, is structure a case study such that it is relevant or analogous to problems that we see at Etsy, though not one-to-one. It's often a little challenging for us. We spend every single day thinking about Etsy problems. You as an interviewee will not have had that benefit. You don't have all the same internal data that we have. And so it can often put an interviewee at a kind of disadvantage. And so having kind of a net new problem space that has similarities to Etsy but isn't Etsy, I've found to be much more fair and a lot more useful ultimately. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap it up there. I know there are a bunch of other great roundtables for you all to get to. So thank you so much for taking the time. Like I said, some of our recruiting folks are going to be in the hiring booth. So hop on over to there. They will be able to answer any lingering questions you have about Etsy. Thank you all for coming and hope you have a great rest of the career fair.